What would happen if the heart you are about to remove suddenly started beating again? This is the story of a doctor who risks everything to save a young woman whom no one believes is alive. The doctor sees that the heart is moving during the extraction and panics. After discovering what happened, he calls the police. Outside, the air is still cold, seeping through the corridors of St. Mary's General Hospital. General Hospital. The cold floor echoes with every step. Michael is there, washing his hands in the steel sink. The sound of the dripping faucet seems to fill the entire dressing room. He takes a deep breath. The day is about to begin. He knows it, but there is a weight on his chest that feels different today. It's not just routine nerves. It's something in the air, in the light that enters without warmth through the high window, in the hand that trembles a little as he putting on his gloves. He looks in the mirror and sees signs of so many early mornings. So many cuts and decisions, but now his gaze is heavy. He just puts on his white coat and tries to adjust the collar, but it seems too loose. He pulls hard and breathes. Today, he doesn't feel like other days. He murmurs a short phrase to himself, almost without air. It seems like an invitation for anything that might happen, and he doesn't know what that is. He walks through the long corridors of the hospital, passing files with the fluorescent light flickers, and Michael suddenly feels a strange cold, even though his gown is closed. What a cold hand this is, he thinks. He runs his arm over his face, shaking it as if waking from a dream. At the end of the hallway, a door is open. The airtight door of the operating room, the place where everything is expected to be nothing but precision. Michael stops at the entrance. He sees the bright lights and the serious looks on the faces of the team, who are already beginning to settling in. Someone is holding a scalpel. Another is arranging an instrument on the metal tray. The silence, their silence, feels different today. Michael takes a deep breath and moves forward. He knows he has to go in, do what he always does, remove organs. The stretcher is in the center of the white room. The light from above falls directly on it, cold, strong, without compassion. The white sheets are stretched tight, covering her up to her neck. Only her face is visible. Young, very young. It seems as if she is still asleep, but she is not. No one knows her name. When she arrived, she was just another victim of a road accident, a nasty rollover. The emergency team said she was already unconscious on the asphalt. The report spoke of trauma, extensive brain damage, no reaction to tests, no sign of consciousness, brain death. And the papers? None. No wallet, no documents. Just an old, dirty backpack lying on the floor of the ambulance. Inside, only clothes and a broken lip. No one called to ask about her. No one came to mourn her. You try not to think about it, but it's difficult. She looked about 19, maybe younger, fair skin, but already starting to lose its color. Her mouth was slightly open. Her hands rested one on top of the other, so delicate, with short, poorly manicured nails. There was a purple bruise on her arm, perhaps from the impact. Her long, dark brown hair was tied back with a faded hair tie. In the hospital file, just one word, unknown in the language of protocols. That's enough when no family member or legal guardian appears, and the diagnosis is brain death. The organs can be used as long as they are in good condition. Of course, a nameless body becomes a donor. The machine says there is no life there anymore. But there is something that bothers him, something strange that has no explanation. The young woman doesn't move. Her eyes are closed, but it seems like they could open at any moment. Michael knows that can't happening. It can't happen. But even so, a nurse approaches and whispers, "Ready, doctor. All the tests have been done. No diseases. Everything is perfect. Full authorization." Michael just nods his head, without saying anything. He approaches the stretcher and looks closely at her face. She has a small scratch on her chin and a band-aid on the left side of her forehead. He wants to ask, "Who were you? Where did you come from? Did anyone call you daughter?" He grabs the edge of the sheet with one hand and closes his eyes for a moment, his head bowed, the heavy gown over his shoulders. That girl there has no name, but she has a whole body, a heart that was beating until yesterday, eyes that saw the world. "Poor thing," he says, almost without a voice. The others prepare the room. The instruments are placed on the tables, everything clean, technical, fast. But inside Michael, everything goes slowly, as if time were stuck in his chest. The sheet is now folded up to her chest. Her face looks even paler than before, colorless. But that's not what catches Michael's attention. It's her hand. He stops, sees it out of the corner of his eye, but doesn't believe it at first. He looks again, moves closer. The girl's fingers are damp, as if they had sweated. Michael frowns. The rest of her body is dry, cold, but her fingers. He looks again, moves closer, lowers his face a little, as if he doesn't trust what he saw. "Look here," he whispers almost soundlessly, discreetly pointing to the girl's hand. No one responds. He looks at the nurse, then at the assistant. His eyes search for some reaction, but everyone continues moving the instruments, the cloths, the trays. They act as if they haven't seen anything, as if it were just normal sweat or some moisture from cleaning, something routine. But Michael doesn't feel it as routine, not with that feeling that filled his chest. It's as if time had stopped there, as if everything else had disappeared. Just him, the girl, and those fingers glowing with life. He moves closer, this time calmly, without making a sound. He touches her hand with his finger, slowly. It's warm, not hot, but warm. He expects to feel that typical icy touch, but he doesn't. He swallows. "This temperature is strange," he comments, trying to get someone else to share his doubt, but nothing. The silence continues, a silence that screams. The anesthetist speaks without looking up. "Everything is in accordance with the reports, doctor. We already checked it." Michael nods, but something inside him is not convinced. A silent voice tells him there is something wrong. He looks at her hand again, her fingers slightly bent, as if preparing to grab something, but they are still, and too alive for what they should be. Michael tries to push that thought away. He has done it before. He cannot get attached. That is how it works. The scalpel is in his hand. He begins the first incision. The blade enters slowly, cutting the skin at chest level. He makes the movement with precision, as he always has, without trembling. But the moment he opens the tissue, something happens. It's subtle, a minimal but real movement. The heart contracts. It's not a spasm, it's not a reflex. Michael stops. The scalpel is still in the air between his fingers. His eyes open wide, the heart muscle there in front of him, beating clearly. He takes a step back. The sound of metal touches the tray beside him. "Did you see that?" The question comes out dry, direct. He looks at the anesthetist, the nurse, the assistant, but no one says anything. They pretend they didn't hear, or maybe they don't want to hear. Michael insists, his voice a little louder now. "The heart moved. I saw it." But the silence continues. Someone pretends to adjust a tube. Another looks at a monitor screen. One of them whispers something like, "Could it be an electrical reflex, doctor?" But even he doesn't seem to believe what he said. Michael looks again, waits, his eyes fixed on the girl's chest. The heartbeat returns, but very faintly. He can only see it by looking very closely, but he knows what he saw was real. It was life. His hand trembles. Sweat runs inside his glove. He feels the weight of the decision forming right there. A second ago, he was just another doctor following protocol. Now he is facing something no one wants to face. Time seems to stand still. Michael still stares at the heart. The scalpel no longer makes sense in his hand. He breathes heavily. The air doesn't seem to be entering properly. He closes his eyes and listens to his own heart beating faster. The whole room was waiting for him, but he didn't move. Inside, his heart was beating fast, as if to remind him that he was there, alive, feeling, screaming. He raised his hand slowly without saying anything. His voice didn't come out right away. He just turned to look at the team and gestured with his eyes as if to say, "Wait." The nurse thought it was just a pause. One of the assistant doctors was about to pick up another instrument, but then Michael spoke, not loudly but firmly. "Close it. Close the chest, now." The room fell silent. A silence louder than any siren filled the air. One of the residents frowned. "Doctor, what do you mean close it? We haven't even started yet." Michael didn't look away. "I'm telling you to close it now." His voice came out in a tone no one had ever heard before. The anesthesiologist looked up from the monitor, confused. "But why? What's going on?" Michael ran his hand over his forehead, took a deep breath, and looked again at the young girl on the stretcher. That lonely girl with no name, but with a heart that was beating. He couldn't ignore it. "I can't go on. She's alive." He said it as if he were revealing a secret. The room reacted with surprise. The nurse dropped an instrument. The assistant shook his head. One of them spoke softly, almost in a whisper. "Doctor, if you stop this without reason, it could be very serious." Michael looked him straight in the eye, as if responding with his soul. "I'd rather lose my license than take the life of someone who still has it." No one responded. The atmosphere became tense. The professionals exchanged glances. Someone snorted. Another commented, almost annoyed, "This is going to cause problems." But Michael didn't change his mind. He knew what he was doing, or maybe he didn't know. He just felt it. He felt it with a force that broke every rule, every protocol. It wasn't madness. It was certainty. That girl was still there, and if he cut one more time, he might extinguish forever something that he still wanted to fight for. Michael took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment, then looked at the team. "If you want to report me, go ahead. I'll take responsibility." The nurse hesitantly began to close the incision. Michael stood silently beside her, looking at the girl. Her fingers were still moist, as if giving thanks. The room fell silent. The scalpel was returned to the tray. The lights were still on, but it seemed as if everything had changed. Michael knew that this decision could cost him everything: his title, his career, his respect. But at that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was a life outside. The hallways were cold. No one looked him in the eye. His colleagues passed by quickly, avoiding him, murmuring. Michael heard one of them say, "It's over for him. It's over." He kept walking. He went to the administrative office. He asked to speak to the director. He tried to explain. He showed the signs. He talked about the heartbeat, the damp hands, the color of the skin. But all he heard was, "Dr. Harris, the tests are in the system. Brain death. There is no basis for changing the protocol." He insisted, "But she's alive. I saw her. I felt her. I'm not imagining it." One of the bosses just looked up his eyes from the screen and said in a dry voice, "If you continue with this, we will have to open an investigation against you." Michael took a deep breath, left the office, and stood in the hallway for a while. No one followed him. He was alone, totally alone. That's when he picked up the phone, called the police directly, asked them to come, and told them everything without hiding anything. He didn't know if they would believe him. He just knew he couldn't pretend nothing had happened. 40 minutes later, the patrol car arrived. The main door of the hospital had barely opened when he was already there. Detective Ulysses wore a heavy coat and walked slowly, his face marked by time. He was about 60 years old, a man who had seen many things and therefore doubted almost everything. Michael was direct. "I need you to come with me. There's a patient who is alive, and they want to continue as if she weren't." Ulysses raised his eyebrow with the look of someone who hears crazy things every day. "Doctor, you know this is serious." "I don't know," he replied. Michael was firm. It was the first time he had called the police about something like this. It was the first time anyone had moved their fingers and heart, even after being diagnosed as dead. Ulysses scratched his beard. His gaze was one of doubt, but with a spark of curiosity. He followed Michael to the surgical area. They passed by the team that was already murmuring in the corners. They reached the room where the girl was. They had taken her back to her bed, covered up to her neck, still under the effect of sedatives. Michael pointed to her. "It's her. No one knows her name. She arrived without any documents. But she's alive, not just in my heart. She's really alive." Ulysses approached and stared for a while. "The hospital authorized me to call you. I didn't call you on my own, and if I have to pay for that, I will." The detective remained silent, then took a deep breath, took a small notebook out of his pocket, and began to write. "I need to record this and see the tests, but today I'm going to stay here as a precaution." Michael nodded, his eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." The young woman was taken back to the ICU with the detective nearby. No one celebrated. There was no relief, only silence. The hospital was silent in the middle of the night. Empty corridors, lights off, only the low hum of the machines in the distance bouncing off the walls. Michael hadn't left. He sat next to the girl's bed, without saying anything, just looking at her. Her face was still calm, her eyes closed, her skin pale. Even so, something felt different. He could feel it in the air, in the room, in his own breathing. The monitor next to the bed looked strange, showing constant straight lines, as always happens when everything is still. But suddenly it wasn't like that anymore. It was showing signs. It seemed like the machines were malfunctioning. Sometimes it went up a little, a scare that was almost imperceptible. Michael frowned and moved closer. The first time it happened, his heart raced before he knew why. The line that had been straight moved very slightly, just a little bit, then returned to normal. He opened his eyes wide and got up slowly, quietly, as if he didn't want to interrupt what he was seeing. Seconds later, there was another movement. Clearer, weaker, yes, but real. The heartbeat was weak, but still there. Michael put his hand on the screen, as if he wanted to feel it on his skin, and then he broke down. Tears came without warning. He covered his face with his hands, unable to hold back. "Who are you?" he whispered, choked up. "Who are you?" His voice came out broken, almost like a child's, as if he were talking to someone he already loved without knowing why. He sat back down, lowered his head, and cried silently. He cried like someone who had carried pain for too long, and now that faint signal on the monitor was as if the world was telling him he had done the right thing. Time passed. Minutes, maybe hours. Michael just stayed there with his eyes still wet until he decided to look around the room. He wanted to know more about her. Anything. A name, a story, something that would tell him who this girl was, for whom he was willing to lose everything. In a corner of the room, near the wall, there was a plastic bag with her things they had collected the day of the accident. Michael walked over to it and opened it slowly. An old blouse, a wet notebook, a broken tennis shoe, and at the bottom, a simple fabric bracelet from the market with hand-embroidered letters that said Celeste. Michael stopped. Michael grabbed that bracelet as if it were something sacred. He squeezed it between her fingers and slowly passed it over her face. It was small and smelled of dust, of the road, of something forgotten, but to him it was as if it had always been hers. Michael, as if talking to a daughter he never had he sat back down next to her, grabbed the bracelet, and with all the care in the world, placed it next to her hand on the bed. Then she rested her forehead on her fingers and closed her eyes. Outside, dawn continued. The days passed slowly, as if time in the hospital were stretched out. Michael came and went through the ICU as if he were keeping a secret. A secret. Celeste was still there, motionless but alive, at least for him, and even though it had all happened, no one showed up. No mother, no father, no friends, no calls, no tears for her other than his. Michael tried not to think about it, but it hurt more than he imagined. How could such a young girl just disappear into the world? He wondered where her mother was. Where was someone to say, "That's my daughter"? The hospital's social work team tried to search. They checked records, called shelters, cross-referenced data, but nothing came up. The only thing that appeared was an old report from a small town, somewhat vague, with no name, no photo, just a mention of an accident on a rural road and a description of a girl of similar age with no identification. That was all. Michael clutched the crumpled paper tightly and looked at Celeste lying there, and the question echoed painfully in his mind. Why did no one come the night the hospital was quiet? It was raining outside, that fine rain that hits the windows like a soft cry. The ICU remained silent with its constant beeps and soft blue lights. Michael was at home, but awake, restless, as if he sensed that something was going to happen. And it did. The next morning, hospital security called him. "Doctor, you have to see this," said the guard with a strange look on his face, staring at the screen in the camera room. Michael, with his coffee still in his hand, and looked at the monitor. It was the recording from the early hours of the morning. Right at the entrance to the ICU area, a thin, hooded female figure appeared. She walked quickly and entered without anyone seeing her. The camera inside shows her standing in front of Celeste's room. She stands there for a while, not trying to enter, just putting her hand on the glass. Then she touches her chest as if to say something, as if asking for forgiveness or forgiveness and strength at the same time. Then she leaves, just as she entered, silently, without leaving a trace. Michael pauses the image and tries to see her face, but he can't. The hood covers almost everything. Only her eyes are visible, and the way she walks, as if tired, as if afraid, like someone who is fleeing. "No one saw her come in?" he asked in a low voice. "No worker? No record? Nothing," replies the guard. Michael stood there, staring at the screen with a heavy heart. That woman, she knew. He knew Celeste. The way she stood, the silence, the look on her face through the glass, was that of someone who loves, of a mother. But why didn't she stay? Why didn't she talk to anyone? Why did she leave as if she couldn't be seen? He put his hand on the screen over the eyes of that hooded woman and whispered, "Who are you?" Michael couldn't sleep after that early morning. The image of the hooded woman remained in his head like an open wound, and that word he had read in the old San Mateo del Sur newsletter began to hammer at his mind. It seemed to call out to him, as if to say, "Come here, the answer is here." He packed a small suitcase, put 2 shirts in it, grabbed the papers from the hospital, and set off down the highway. No one sent him. No one asked him to. It was because he felt it, and sometimes feeling is stronger than any reason. The trip was long, more than 2 hours driving on ugly roads full of potholes, dust, and silence. The car radio played an old song about nostalgia, but he wasn't even listening to it properly. His head was there, with her, with the girl who still called someone without saying a single word. When he passed the welcome sign to San Mateo del Sur, he felt a chill. It was as if the air had changed. The town was small, with simple houses, dirt roads, and people walking slowly, looking suspiciously at everything that came from outside. There was a small store on the corner, an old church in the center, and children playing soccer on a dirt field. Michael slowly stopped the car, got out, and took a photo of the bracelet with the name Celeste on it. He kept it in his pocket as if it were a map. He went into the little shop. "Good afternoon. Do you know a girl named Celeste?" The owner of the place, a bald man, just looked at him and shrugged his shoulders, pretending he hadn't heard anything. He continued cutting cheese. Michael said, "Thank you," even though no one answered him. He left and tried with a woman at the door of her house who had a child in her arms. She looked at the ground, shook her head, and went inside without saying anything. He tried 2-3 more times. People turned their faces away, closed their windows, changed the subject. Michael began to feel a chill in his chest, a bitter sadness, until a girl sitting on the sidewalk, about 10 years old, pointed her chin toward a corner of the village and whispered, "Ask for Doña Elena. She lived nearby." Michael thanked her with a tired smile and followed the clue. He came to an old wooden house with a bent iron gate. He knocked, and an elderly woman came out, her body hunched over, a scarf tied around her head, deep eyes that had seen too much. "Good afternoon," he said. "Excuse me for bothering you, but I was told that you might know a young woman named Celeste." She remained silent, her face motionless, only her eyes reacting, shining, but it was quick and discreet. "I don't know her," she said firmly, with a strong accent. Michael was about to thank her and leave, but she grabbed the gate tightly, as if her body were saying one thing and her heart another. Before he left, she murmured softly, "Here, one learns not to speak," and closed the gate calmly, without anger, only with pain. Michael returned to the car, sat in the driver's seat, rested his head on the steering wheel, and stayed there, silent again. But this time, the silence of the town said more than 1,000 words. Celeste was there, and something very bad had happened. The sun was beginning to set when Michael thought about giving up. The town seemed like a labyrinth without doors, made of secrets and fear, but something inside him said, "Stay a little longer, just a little longer." It was then that he saw a woman sitting in the shade of an old terrace, dressed in simple clothes, her eyes quiet but attentive. Michael approached carefully, without making a sound. "Good afternoon. Excuse me, ma'am. My name is Michael. I'm a doctor. I'm trying to find out more about a girl named Celeste." The woman was silent for a while, very silent. She just looked at him. Michael thought she was going to turn her face away too, but after a few seconds, she lowered her head as if she needed to gather her courage and replied in a whisper, "Don't say that name so loudly." Michael crouched down to her level. "I was told that she lived here, that she was from this town." The woman looked around, confirmed that no one was nearby, and only then spoke softly, as if the wind could hear her. "Celeste's mother disappeared months ago." Michael's blood ran cold. She disappeared? She left one night without a suitcase, without anything. She was never heard from again. Some say it was because of her father, a harsh, cold man with an icy stare. People here are afraid of him. Michael swallowed hard. "And Sel?" The lady took a while to answer, but she continued, still looking at the ground, her voice low and trembling. "That girl lived in silence. She didn't talk to anyone. She just went from home to school with her head down, always with sad eyes. Sometimes I saw her sitting near the well, not playing, not smiling, as if she were carrying a weight greater than her back could bear." Michael clenched his fingers with contained anger. No one did anything. The woman shook her head slowly. "Here, one learned to keep quiet out of fear, out of shame, out of exhaustion." She looked him straight in the eye for the first time. If she is still alive, she needs someone to speak for her. Michael felt a lump in his throat. His hand touched the pocket where the photo of the bracelet with her name was. The word Celeste seemed to burn through the fabric. The neighbor gave the last piece of information fearfully, looking side to side, as if telling a very dangerous secret. She said that the Rivera family lived in a secluded house at the end of the dirt road behind the old church, which was closed, and that no one wanted to go there. Michael walked on. The day was coming to an end, and the city was becoming silent, as if holding its breath. The house appeared among the trees, its wood damaged by time, its windows covered with crossbars, and the gate fallen to one side, rusted. A dog barked in the distance. Michael pushed the gate slowly, and it creaked loudly, almost as if the house was warning him not to enter, but he went in. The air was heavy with the smell of dampness and abandonment. The cement floor was broken in the corner of the living room, a broken doll and a girl's sandal covered in mud. Michael climbed the 2 steps from the entrance, passing through a dark kitchen full of old marks on the wall, as if someone had hit, kicked, and stuck things there many times. Then he saw the door. It was the only room locked from the inside, but with a little push, it opened. The room was small, with no windows. The air inside was stagnant. The torn wallpaper showed damp spots, and on the walls were drawings stuck with tape, some nailed with nails made of colored pencils and notebook paper. The edges crumpled. Michael looked at them one by one. An angel with very large wings surrounded by chains, a girl with her hands tied and her eyes covered, another drawing with a door locked from the inside, and a woman crying outside, and a phrase written in large, scratched letters on one of the drawings. "My house is not a home." Michael stopped, his breath caught in his throat. His hand trembled when he touched the mattress of the little bed that still had an old sheet on it. He pushed carefully and felt something hard underneath. It was a crumpled notebook with a light blue cover that was already faded. A diary. He sat on the floor and opened it slowly. The pages were yellowed but legible, and the words inside hurt. "Dad says I shouldn't talk," Michael read aloud, and his heart began to break. To break. "My mom screams when she closes the door. Then she doesn't talk for days." He turned the page. The drawings were soft, almost like a little girl's, with spelling mistakes, but full of truth. "I wanted to run, but my heart beats very softly. I can't play because my heart can't take it. I can only draw, the only thing I do, and watch the other children play. I can't run. I can't do anything." Michael put his hand to his face and cried quietly, silently, as she surely cried many times without anyone hearing her. "I asked God to take me, but he leaves me here." The short sentences, the crooked letters, the sad drawings, everything there told of a life with hidden pain. A girl afraid of her father, with her love for her mother broken, and with a heart too fragile that still tried to beat. Michael closed the notebook slowly, as if closing a small coffin. He hugged it to his chest. He remained there, kneeling on the floor of that room, breathing heavily, trying to piece together what he was feeling. Celeste's pain was everywhere, on the walls, in the silence, in the dust, and now inside him. It was more than a medical case. It was a life that no one saw, that no one wanted to see. But he saw it, and he would never forget it. Michael returned to the hospital with the diary pressed against his chest, his eyes red, his body tired. But his soul was burning. He was no longer the same person who had left there. Now he carried more than suspicions. He carried pain, Celeste's pain, and he knew that something very bad had happened. He went straight to the ICU. The girl was still there, unchanged, but something about her seemed lighter, as if she had sensed from afar that someone had finally heard what she had been silently screaming for so long. Michael stood still for a moment, watching, then walked slowly down the hall until he found Carmen, the oldest nurse there, her hands full of stories, her eyes having seen what many people pretend does not exist. She was sitting writing on a chart when she saw Michael. She lowered her head. Michael pulled up a chair and sat down next to her. "Carmen, I need to know the truth from the beginning. What did they do to that girl?" She looked down the hallway, made sure no one was listening, and then spoke with pain in her voice. "She arrived unconscious, yes, but there was something strange. The tests were still being done, the protocols were still in process, and yet they were already preparing for organ donation." Michael frowned. How could that be, before the final results? Carmen closed her eyes for a second, as if guarding a long-held secret. Someone wanted to rush everything. It's not the first time, but this time was different. I saw her. The girl was breathing slowly, but she was breathing. Michael felt his chest tighten. "Carmen, that's a crime. I know. And that's why I kept quiet, because here, those who talk too much disappear from the shift. Do you understand?" Michael lowered his head and clenched his fists. That same day, Ulysses, the detective, called him into a private room. His face was serious, but there was something in his eyes that said, "You were right. I reviewed the case files and compared them with the admission records. There's something fishy here, doctor." Michael leaned forward. "What did you find?" "The girl's neurological tests were changed. There's a test that shows very low, almost invisible, but enough to prevent immediate organ donation. Only that paper disappeared. They replaced it with another one marked, 'No activity.'" Michael fell silent. His heart was beating very fast. Ulysses continued, "We also discovered something even more serious. She has a rare heart condition. Her heart beats very weakly, very quietly, almost inaudible with normal equipment. But it never stopped. It never stopped." Michael's eyes widened, so she wasn't dead. Ulysses took a deep breath and then said firmly, "She never was." Michael's world spun around. Celeste was being prepared to die on purpose, with false documents, in a hurry, because no one claimed her, because she was invisible, and he almost let that happen. He got up slowly and looked out the window of the room where the afternoon light shone into the hospital corridors, and at that moment, he made a silent promise. That girl was going to live, even if he had to fall with her. The name Belmont had been heard in the hallways for years. A quiet voice, a quick whisper, a comment exchanged in the coffee room, but no one had ever really confronted him. He was the kind of doctor who always wore a clean coat and held his head high, a famous surgeon, an award-winning lecturer, respected. Everyone called him the miracle doctor, but behind that fame, there was something else, a coldness that didn't show in the photos. Michael had always kept his distance, but now, everything pointed to him. The name Belmont was on the authorization protocol to donate Celeste's organs. It was he who signed the final report. It was he who authorized the procedure, even though the examination was unclear, even though the patient was still breathing, even though it was very little. Michael began to review the files. Other similar cases appeared. People without families, without papers, without defense. Everything was too fast, too efficient. "Carmen," the nurse spoke, almost in a whisper. "Dr. Belmont doesn't like to wait. He says the waiting list for an organ is very cruel. But there are things that don't add up. I saw donors who were released with incomplete examinations. I saw families who didn't want to find out. I saw a lot of haste. Too much haste." Michael sat alone in the office with all the papers on the table. He was sweating cold. He knew how serious what he had in his hands was. If he continued with this, Belmont would fall, but with him others would fall too, and he himself could be dragged down. "If I say anything, I could lose everything," he muttered, staring into space. At that moment, Michael felt he was standing on the edge of an abyss. On one side was his entire career, built with effort, sleepless nights, and fears kept silent. On the other side was a girl, just one, but she could be the first of many. Celeste didn't have a name until recently, but now she had a face, a story, pain, and he knew too much to pretend he didn't. If he stayed silent, no one would bother him. The hospital would remain peaceful. Belmont would continue to be applauded at conferences. But Celeste would die. Maybe not today, but she would die, and others would too. Michael put his hand on his head, took a deep breath, and felt his eyes fill with tears. Not from fear, but from exhaustion and helplessness. "What if she were my daughter?" he said in a low voice, as if someone on the other side of life could answer his dilemma. It wasn't just professional. It was human. It was ethical. It was a cry from within, and now he had to choose: comfortable silence or painful truth. The morning light filtered softly through the ICU curtain. It was early. Almost no one had arrived at the hospital yet. Michael had spent another sleepless night. He no longer knew how many early mornings he had sat there next to that bed, talking to Celeste, even though she didn't respond. But that day there was something different in the air. He entered the room as usual, silently, sat down slowly, took her diary out of his pocket, the one he had found in the locked room, ran his fingers over the worn cover, read a sentence in a low voice. "My heart beats very softly." Closed the notebook, looked at her. Celeste's face was the same, motionless, as every day, strands of her hair falling across her forehead, her chest rising and falling, slowly, sustained by the machines. Michael no longer knew if he was speaking for her or for himself, but he said, "I'm here, you know. I'm not leaving." He lowered his head and remained silent, his hand on hers, and then something so small but so strong happened. Her eyelids moved slowly, almost imperceptibly, a slight tremor, as if the eyes inside were trying to open a crack in the darkness. It was only a second, but it was enough. Michael saw it, and for a second he thought he was dreaming. He sat up suddenly, unable to breathe. He looked straight at her face, and again there was a slight movement, a real living reaction. He knelt down. "You're here, my girl." His voice came out choked with tears. "Hold on. Please hold on a little longer." He removed his hands and brought them to his face, as if trying to stop a heart that was about to explode. "Don't go. You can't go now. Not now. Not after all that." He moved closer and touched her forehead with his own, very tenderly. His eyes closed. "Forgive me for coming late, but you are no longer alone, Celeste." Tears fell onto the white sheet and ran down his arm as if they wanted to wake her up with love. That moment, that simple blink, was enough for everything to return. Hope, faith, the certainty that although weak, although wounded, although forgotten, Celeste was still there, and as long as she wanted to, he was going to fight to the end. He prayed for her, asked God, placed the diary in her hands, and stayed there for a few more minutes, just watching. The next day, Michael returned early to the hospital. He carried that little victory in his heart, but the world seemed ready to erase everything. He entered the room softly, already with the diary in his mind, wanting to reread those phrases like someone remembering a cry for help. He wanted to show them, to prove that Celeste was not just a body, but someone who felt, wrote, asked for help, and he had kept it carefully, always in the same place, under her pillow, wrapped in a white cloth. But that day, it was gone. Michael searched calmly, then urgently. He removed the sheet, lifted the mattress, opened the closet. Nothing. The diary had disappeared. He froze. He ran to the reception area and asked Carmen, the nurse on duty. "Carmen, have you seen the diary? Hers?" She shook her head, her eyes wide. "Doctor, it was there yesterday. I saw it myself. I swear on everything." Michael took a deep breath, trying not to explode. He went to the doctor's room, searched through drawers, called colleagues, asked questions. No one knew, or pretended not to know, until the thought stopped him. It came quickly, clear as a knife. Belmont returned with heavy steps down the hallway and entered his office without knocking. Belmont was sitting there, reading with papers, looking too calm for someone who was guilty. He didn't even flinch. "Doctor," Michael said without looking up. "Is there a problem?" Michael was direct. "The diary is gone. The one that belonged to the girl, Celeste." Belmont looked up slowly. "Diary? What diary?" Michael approached him, his face tense. "Don't play games with me. It was there, with everything she went through. I know someone went into the room and took it." Belmont calmly closed the folder and folded his hands on the desk. "Doctor, you're accusing someone without any evidence." Michael hesitated. His blood was boiling, but he knew it. He knew he was trapped. There was no camera, no witnesses, just the emptiness where Celeste's only voice had been. "If you got involved in that," Michael said, swallowing his anger, "you erased the only thing she wrote, the only chance she had to be heard." Belmont smiled slightly. "Doctor, in this hospital we work with facts, not feelings." Michael felt the world was spinning. He left the office without saying another word. He just walked to the end of the hallway and leaned against the wall. He stood there still, his eyes red, his throat tight. He had no proof, and he knew that without the diary, no one would listen to Celeste, at least not yet. Night fell slowly, with that strange calm that comes before a storm. Michael was sitting next to Celeste with his head resting on the edge of the bed, his eyes almost closed. The day had been very hard. The exhaustion was no longer just physical. It was in his soul, a tiredness that only comes when you carry more than you can bear. The room was dark, only the light from the monitor flickering blue, low, like a star that doesn't want to stop shining. The silence was so loud that you could hear the sound of the tubes of the machines breathing for her, and then something broke the silence. It was soft, a whisper. "Mom?" Michael opened his eyes wide. He got up slowly and looked at her face. Her lips moved. "Mom." Her voice was thin, weak, slurred, but it was real. Just one word, a single word, but it came from a deep place inside a girl who had been lying there for days, without saying anything. Michael fell to his knees. "You're here," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "My girl, you're here." Tears flowed uncontrollably. He grabbed her hand and brought it close to his face, as if to say, "Please stay, just a little longer." That word, "Mom," was not just a call. It was a muffled cry from a girl who had experienced more pain than can be counted. It was proof that Celeste was still fighting, even though she had no strength, even though she had no voice. She wanted to live, and she wanted her mom that night. Michael didn't sleep. He stood looking out the hospital window at the city outside, knowing nothing. And there he made his decision. He couldn't wait for justice inside the hospital. Not with documents disappearing, powerful people hiding everything, and silence forcing those who wanted to help to stay quiet. It was time to speak up. The next morning he called a journalist he knew and told him everything. He said he didn't want fame, he didn't want awards, he didn't want war. He just wanted the world to hear that girl just once. Hours later, Michael was in front of the cameras in his gown, his eyes tired but steady, and he said, "Her name is Celeste. She is 19 years old. She was given up for dead, but she is alive. I saw her. I felt it. She has a necklace with her name written by hand. She had a diary with accounts of abuse. She disappeared as she would have disappeared if I had remained silent." He showed the bracelet and spoke of the first time her heart beat on the surgery table, from the wet fingers of the eyes that opened, from the word, he said, and he finished with a trembling voice. "She is still here, but she needs help. Not just medical help, human help. She needs to be seen." The interview aired that same night, and no one ignored it. The whole country finally heard Celeste. The sun had barely risen on the horizon when Michael entered the room. The hallway was still empty, but the hospital was no longer the same since the interview. He knew it. He felt it in the looks, in the whispers, in the different weight that the word Celeste now had. He took a deep breath before opening the door. He didn't know what he was going to find. He only knew that his heart was beating differently. As he entered, he stopped. Celeste's eyes were open. I didn't go in. Open, Not moving, truly open, clear, present. Time stopped at that moment. Michael was speechless. His hands were shaking, and his heart felt like it was come out of his throat. He approached carefully, as if afraid she would disappear right there, as if in a dream. She blinked slowly, breathing with difficulty, but she was there, looking at the ceiling, feeling the light, the world, life. Michael knelt beside the bed, rested his forehead on her hand, and the tears came without shame, without haste. She turned her face slightly. Her lips moved weakly, but it was heard. "Where is my mom?" Her voice was so fragile, as if she had crossed a dark forest crawling just to be able to say that sentence. Michael closed his eyes. That question was everything. It was hope, it was fear, it was nostalgia, it was love, and it was pain, a lot of pain. He held her hand carefully. "I heard you, my girl. I heard you." But he couldn't answer the question because he didn't know why it hurt, because what she wanted might not be there yet. Celeste didn't cry. She just lay there with her eyes open, staring at the ceiling, like someone who is waiting, like someone who is enduring, like someone who needs something bigger than just a physical cure. Michael stayed there with her. He didn't say anything else. He just stayed because sometimes staying is all someone needs. In that room, there was no longer just a patient. There was a survivor, a daughter, and that was the miracle. She came back, but along with life, the pain also returned. The painful question, the heavy absence. And yet that was the first step, the first breath of a story that still needs an ending, and Michael would be there until the end. Days after the interview, the hospital was flooded with people calling, sending messages, coming from far away, offering help. Celeste was suddenly no longer invisible. She had a name, a face, a story, and the whole country wanted to know where her mother was. Michael tried to focus on what was important, being by her side, protecting her, making her feel safe. But that question kept coming back all the time, and it hurt. It hurt her, and it hurt him too. Then, on a cold morning, a phone call changed everything. A social worker called from a shelter in the countryside. Her voice was trembling, but hopeful. She said that a woman had arrived there, thin, shaking, with marks on her body and face. She had arrived quietly, barely speaking, but after seeing the news, she broke down and said that her daughter's name was Celeste. Michael took the car that very and drove all day. He didn't feel tired, only urgency, fear that it was too late or that he couldn't bear what he was about to hear. When he arrived, they took him to a small room that smelled of damp and disinfectant. In a corner, sitting on a plastic chair, was she. The woman was thin, her hair tied back haphazardly, her eyes sunken, her arms crossed over her chest, her gaze somewhere between alert and dull, like someone who had been hiding inside herself for years, had spent years hiding inside herself. Michael approached slowly, without making a sound, and sat down in front of her. "My name is Michael. I'm a doctor. I'm taking care of your daughter." She didn't react immediately, only lowering her head. Her shoulders shook, and then a question came out, as if for the first time in a long time. "Is she alive?" Michael nodded, his eyes full of tears. "Yes, she's alive." The woman put her hand to her mouth and began to cry, a low, broken cry that seemed to come from deep within, from years of fear, silence, and hidden pain. "I ran away," she said between sobs. "Her father beat us and yelled, and one day I thought he was going to kill me and hurt Celeste, so I left. I ran with what I could, but she stayed behind. I couldn't take her with me." Michael approached her and gently touched her arm. "You did what you could, and now she needs you." Her mother looked at him with her eyes wide open, damaged, but alive. She asked, "Did she ask for me?" Michael couldn't hold back the tears. He took a deep breath and said, the first word she said was "Mommy." The woman broke down. She knelt on the floor of the room, crying with her face hidden in her own hands. And there, on the cold floor of the shelter, a mother was reborn. Because sometimes a miracle isn't just opening your eyes. It's knowing that even after everything, there is still someone waiting for you. The hallway was silent. It was not the usual hospital silence made up of monitors and hurried footsteps. It was another kind of silence, full of expectation. Michael walked slowly beside her. The woman, Celeste's mother, her hair tied back as if it were a borrowed blouse from the shelter, her eyes swollen from crying so much, but with something in her chest that no one could explain, a strength that only a mother knows. Every step she took seemed to weigh a lifetime. Michael walked beside her, but he knew that this path was hers alone. The door to the ICU opened slowly. Carmen was already there, waiting. She looked at Michael with a lump in her throat, then made room for the mother to enter. Celeste was lying there with her eyes open, still weak but alert, the tube no longer in her mouth, air entering slowly. She didn't know who was coming. She only heard footsteps, and this saw Michael. He stayed behind, Carmen beside him. No one said anything. The woman stood in front of her daughter. She didn't speak or cry right away. She just looked at her, trying to understand if it was a dream or a miracle. Celeste also remained silent. Her eyes shone. Tears came before her voice. There were no words, only the gaze of someone who had waited a lifetime for that moment. Then the mother approached, bent down, and with both hands trembling, touched her daughter's face slowly, as if she were still a baby. Celeste closed her eyes, and a tear fell, then another, and another, and then the embrace happened. An embrace not just between two people, but of healing, forgiveness, reunion, and relief. Michael couldn't take it anymore, and leaned against the wall with tears in his eyes. Carmen approached without saying a word, and grabbed his hand tightly, as if to say, "You brought her back." Time stood still in that room. The machines continued to beep, the devices making their usual noises, but everything inside was silent. A silence that screamed love, a love that needed no words. A few days after the reunion, the hospital that had previously been hidden in silence was filled with loud voices, not from patients, but from researchers, delegates, and journalists. The atmosphere was different. The walls that had once been accomplices to what was hidden now trembled with the truth coming from outside. Michael was sitting in the director's office when he heard several firm footsteps. A heavy presence filled the floor. He got up slowly, went to the door, and saw Belmont in combat gear, handcuffed, with 2 police officers at his sides, and a delegate in front, eyes of stone. Everyone in the corridor looked at him. Nurses, doctors, patients. No one said anything. They just stared. Belmont kept his chin up, but his eyes knew they were defeated. Carmen approached Michael and spoke to him quietly. They found the documents, false reports, altered protocols, several names of patients who were never properly examined. Michael closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Celeste had been the last straw. Her case opened the whole can of worms. The newspapers soon ran the headline, "Famous doctor arrested for speeding up transplants with false documents." But what no one saw was what was happening behind the headline. Colleagues being pushed aside, nurses who knew but kept quiet, administrators who turned their faces away, one by one, falling like dominoes. Justice was not swift, but it was fair. Carmen approached Michael and spoke to him quietly. They found the documents, false reports, altered protocols, several names of patients who were never properly examined. Michael closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Celeste had been the last straw. Her name opened the whole can of worms. Michael saw colleagues being pushed aside, people he knew. For years, nurses who knew but kept quiet, administrators who turned their faces away, one by one, falling like dominoes. Justice was not swift, but it was fair. And there, in the midst of it all, he felt no relief. He felt a void, because the pain that led to all this was from people who could no longer tell their story. Celeste survived, but how many did not survive while they took Belmont away? Michael did not scream. He did not point it. He just looked and thought of a phrase that had been going round and round in his head since the beginning. If she were your daughter, would you let her go? Michael entered the management office for the last time with a calm face but a tired look in his eyes. He no longer had the same urgency as before, nor the same sparkle in his eyes. He walked slowly, as if carrying something much heavier than his shoulders could bear, and when he sat down in the chair in front of the papers, he spoke softly. almost as if asking for forgiveness. "I need some time." No one argued. No one said anything. The whole hospital knew. They knew he had reached the end, that he had carried a child on his shoulders while everyone else looked the other way, and now he needed to breathe. He left with his head held high, without making a fuss, without a speech, only with the silence of someone who had done the right thing, even though it hurt his pocket. He carried a photo of Celeste's bracelet, and in his heart something that couldn't be explained. He didn't leave town, nor did he disappear. He just stopped wearing his doctor's coat. But every day, without fail, he would arrive at the hospital with a book under his arm. Sometimes it was a novel, sometimes a comic book, other times just a blank notebook. He would sit next to Celeste's bed and read quietly, calmly, as if each word could heal others. Days he brought small, colorful, simple pink flowers and put them in a glass of water next to the bed. The ICU was no place for flowers, but no one dared to remove them. He also brought drawings made by children who had heard his story on TV, drawings of hearts, smiles, and angels. Michael stuck them one by one on the wall until her room was filled with color. Celeste was still recovering, her voice weak, her body was slow, but her eyes sparkled every time he came in. It was as if just seeing him reminded her that life was worth staying in. Michael was no longer just a doctor. He was the presence, the hug that was missing, the care that saved her, the voice that insisted when the world told her to be quiet. And even though he no longer had his badge, even though he was outside, he was still there. Because when you love without expecting anything in return, you don't need a uniform. You just need to be there. The months passed, slow, careful with every step, as if walking on glass. Celeste improved little by little, day after day. Her body recovered slowly, but her heart was always fragile, and Michael knew it. He knew it from the first weak heartbeat he heard that day, when it all began. The tests confirmed what he already suspected. She needed a transplant, a new heart, and it wasn't just any heart. The rare type of problem Celeste had, she needed an almost perfect donor, and the waiting list was long, very long, but she waited patiently, with a hope that only those who have been close to the end have. Michael waited with her, sitting by her side, holding her hand, reading books about courage and love, until one day, the phone rang. It was Carmen. "Doctor, it's here," she said. Michael didn't understand at first. "It's here? The heart? A compatible donor? I wanted to let you know because you were the one who kept her alive." He didn't respond. He just closed his eyes and let the silence speak for him. The preparations were made quickly, but carefully. The hospital moved as one. Every nurse, every doctor, every technician, everyone knew what this surgery meant. It wasn't just another transplant. It was a chance to start again, a life that had almost been extinguished. Michael asked to be present in the operating room, and they gave him permission. When they took Celeste to the operating room, she had her eyes open and held tightly to her mother's hand as she walked beside her with trembling steps. Michael followed behind, saying nothing, just looking at the door to the operating room. Celeste turned her face and whispered, "I'm going to die." Michael bent down to her level and smiled with tears in his eyes. "Not now. You're going to live, really live." She smiled back at him, a soft, tired smile, but one full of faith. The door closed, and time ceased to exist. Inside, time ceased to exist. The surgery began, long and tense. Every second seemed like a test of patience. The monitors filled the room with constant sounds. The scalpel made its cuts with great care. The change was made with precision, but the silence cut deeper than any tool. Michael watched everything from the next room, behind the glass, his hands clenched, his eyes fixed, almost not breathing. Hours later, when it was all over, there was no celebration, just a collective sigh, a good kind of tiredness, the kind that comes after saving a life. The new heart beat slowly but strongly, and for the first time since it all began, Michael leaned his head against the cold wall of the hallway and cried. This time it wasn't because of pain, it was because of relief, it was because of love. It was because of the miracle that followed. The light in the room was soft. The sun entered through the window carefully, as if it knew that someone was inside, waking up from the darkness. Celeste slowly opened her eyes. Everything seemed silent, as if the world were waiting for her. Michael was sitting there in the same chair as always, his hands on his knees and his gaze full of exhaustion, but also hope. He saw that she had opened her eyes and stopped breathing for a moment. Celeste said, almost in a whisper, and blinked. Her eyes moved slowly, recognizing the place. She felt her body strange, weak. There was a weight on her chest, but it wasn't pain. It was different, as if something new was inside her, beating. Her voice came out faint, almost soundless. "I'm going to die." Michael got up slowly, approached the bed, and with tears in his eyes, smiled. "Not now. Your heart is beating strongly." She fell silent, her eyes filled with tears, but not tears of fear. They were tears of relief from someone who finally understands that she is truly alive. Celeste stretched out her arms with difficulty. Michael approached her, and at that moment, she hugged him, not with physical strength because her body still hurt, but with all her heart could give. It was a long, silent hug, a hug that said more than any words could. There, in that moment, Michael was no longer just the doctor. He was the man who believed in her when no one else did, who cried out for her when she had no voice, who fought when everyone said it was better to give up. She rested her face on his shoulder and whispered softly, "Thank you." Michael closed his eyes and just let the tears fall, because sometimes saving a life is not performing a miracle. It's just not giving up. And there, between machines and flowers, next to the bed, Celeste was reborn with a new heart, a heart named Michael. And if she were your daughter, if you walked into a cold room and saw a body lying there, and everyone said it was just another number, would you accept it? Or would you have the courage to listen to the silence as Michael did? This story moved you. Comment below what you would do. Cold room and saw a body lying there still, and everyone said it was just another number. Would you accept it? Or would you have the courage to listen to the silence, as Michael did? Comment below what you would do in Michael's place or in Celeste's mother's place. Would you have the strength to fight against everything and everyone? Or would you remain silent for fear of losing? Write what you felt, and don't forget to activate the bell to receive the next stories. A new video is coming, full of truth, pain, but also hope. Now click on the video that is appearing on your screen. It is a profound, true story that has already made many people cry. There are people who wrote to me afterwards saying that they never saw life the same way again. Go watch it, but be prepared, because this next video also goes straight to the heart.